All right, everyone. So this short video that I'm making is about creating motion and tension in electronic music. So the idea is that we are, in some ways, making music get dramatic over time, over the course of 8 bars, for example, or 16 measures. And the idea is to create what's called a buildup or a drive to a downbeat of some kind that increases intensity over time and is basically kind of forcing the arrival of a new music. So we hear this all the time in electronic music, in all kinds of music, even, and we also hear it in sound design all the time. So you basically create a simple texture of music that slowly builds up through a bunch of different techniques to reach a climax, which then resolves into the next section. The most obvious example you can think of in electronic music is when music pushes towards a drop, and then we have the drop, or what's called the chorus, is a new music changes, but that drive to the drop is what we're trying to learn how to mimic in electronic music that we hear all the time. So the things that we're talking about here are a couple of different concepts. The first one, well, there's really five. There's 5 concepts here. The first one is expanding the frequency spectrum. And this is probably kind of the principal factor in all of this, everything we're going to do today. It's going to basically open up the spectrum, make things get louder, because we're going to hear more frequencies in the frequency band, but also in the low and the high end, but also that expanding of the frequency band increases its intensity to our ears. The next one is to creating a white noise filter sweep. So it's very, very common in electronic music to hear white noise go whoosh. That kind of motion is really easy to make and very effective at creating arrival points in music. The third one is building rhythmic complexity and intensity. So what happens often is that the drums start simple, but over the course of those 8 measures, they build up, they get more crazy, and then they reach an apex right before this drop section happens. The fourth one is adding more layers to create complexity and intensity. So this does many things, actually. Adding more layers also increases the frequency spectrum often, because you're adding another octave above a melody, or you're adding a low end sound, or by creating more complexity and intensity in the drums, you're adding low frequency sounds as well, but those layers also create more volume, so that intensity grows as well. And then the last one is using reverse crash cymbals as effects. So this is incredibly common, and it's very much related to number 2. So we take the sound of a crash cymbal, we reverse it to get a whoosh type of effect. It's like a very short, basically white noise filter sweep is what that creates. So let's take a listen to what we're going to be building today and how this works. So I've created this little project in Ableton that just has a couple of buildups. So you can see we have arrival number 1 here at the top. This is the first kind of moment where we've reached an apex, and then it starts to build again. Then we reach arrival 2, or I could actually probably rename this to the drop. Okay, this is when we reach, actually in this case, more what sounds like a verse, but this intro is bringing us to the first verse. The intensity grows and grows, and then at the drop, we get the real drums for the first time, and the melody settles down a little bit. So let's just take a listen to this whole thing first. It's only a couple of tracks. It's not very big. Here it is. So mostly what we're talking about here is this first section here, basically from arrival 1 to the drop is the main build up here. I'm going to add another one of these over here. And this basically is the main driving section of this. We have a short little intro of 8 bars, and then we have this driving 9 through 16 measures. So, first of all, one of the most principled concepts here is, again, expanding the frequency spectrum. So we mostly do that through a low-pass filter, slowly opening up that low-pass filter until it lets in all the frequencies, essentially. So if we look at the different components here, we have our main synth, right? And so let's start with that and just talk about what's happening here. The main synth sounds like this, right, from the beginning. And you can already see the automation from this. So on this synthesizer, I have a low pass, actually a band pass filter going on because I'm just removing the low end. But really what we're looking at here is this upper frequency which is being filtered. So listen to this over time. I'm using automation to open up the filter of this sound. So you get the idea. And over the course of those 8 bars, it's going to open up, maybe not all the way, but most of the way. If I want to increase the intensity of this sound, I can actually change the resonant peak, right? Which is called the Q here, but it is the resonant peak. And that's also going to increase the intensity of this filter sweep. Makes it a little bit edgier. Okay, so that's the main idea here, right? And we're going to be doing that with other sounds as well. So the second thing that I do, so filter sweeping, right? I'm doing this on multiple things. The main thing, though, is that synthesizer. I am going over here and expanding the frequency spectrum of that filter over time, okay? And it's happening over the course of those 8 bars that filter is moving. So if I go back here, you can actually see the automation. It goes from bar 8 up to bar 17, and it's sweeping up, right? The second one is I've added a second sound here. So now we have another synthesizer. It's actually, I think, the same synth. It is the same synth, except that it now has an overdrive. So there's an overdrive effect, which is going to add lots of distortion, of course, and intensity to the sound. And really, the only thing that I'm doing here is I am filtering it. So you can see down here, whether or not it's happening or not, the dry wet is what's happening. So over the course of the 8 bars, this sound increases in sound over time by increasing how much of the sound is being passed through that through the overdrive. So let's listen to that now. So that's the main thing, object of what's going on, right? That's what's going to increase the intensity. So when the two of these sounds are together, the first synth and the second synth, now we get this really dramatic effect of the intensity building over time in these 8 bars. So if we look at some other elements then too, the third thing on here is to build rhythmic complexity and intensity, right? So as you heard in this, very commonly that kick drum will start coming in, right? In this case, I start to bring it in on every, I think, 2 beats, but then I also add other instruments, right? So if we expand these drums a little bit, you can see that my kick drum and my snare, my kick drum comes in halfway through and it's on every measure, and then it increases in intensity. If we look at the MIDI track, you can see that it starts off at bar 5 on every 2 beats, actually, and then it increases to every beat in bar 7, and then every 8th note at the beginning of bar 8, right, for the first half of it. In addition to this, I have a snare drum. So several things are happening with the snare drum. First of all, it just has some filter automation on it. So if we look at it, once again, I have a filter here, which you can see is pretty intense. It's, in fact, at the beginning, it's going to be so cut off you barely hear it, but it's going to slowly increase over time. Right? So the filter is opening, and I'm just using easy automation with that. But then in addition to that, what I've done is change the pitch. You can hear the pitch of the sound go up. So if I click on this, the sample of this, right? This is the sample. And way down here under transposition, you can see the transposition. So it's going to start at 0 and then slowly increase over time. So of course, what's happening, right? I'm introducing higher frequencies in the snare and also more intense rhythm. So it's combining together to also create a filter-ish sweep, right, over time. And then there's also this sweep of that initial sound. So, and then the next thing too, you can see here at bar 9, I've also brought in hi-hats. So we had no hi-hats at the beginning. I'm adding another layer, putting these hi-hats in, right? They actually don't change over time, other than there are more notes over the course of these 8 bars. And that's it. So all of those things combined together, if we listen to just the drums, right, we get this sound. The hi-hats come in. Now the kick drum and the snare. And then we get into our drum beat starting here, okay? So all of those factors together come in, are contributing. Another thing that we have up here is this repeating sound. So you can see I have another filter sweep going on down here on this top track. It's a repeated note. It sounds like this. And it starts off really squashed and then also opens up over time. So that sound is also contributing to this. And then in addition, at bar 13, I introduced this other sound. It's a recording. You can hear it's actually kind of a mix. It's actually, this sample is down an octave, and that's where that comes from. So all this rhythmic complexity builds up over the course of these 8 bars to really make this impactful when we arrive at the drop, okay? The last 2 things to talk about here are the white noise filter sweeps, right? So the white noise filter sweep and the cymbal. So what I have on here is, first of all, I'm using Operator. So Operator, of course, is one of Ableton's plugins. And the reason I'm using it is because I can set the oscillator. Oscillator 1 is the only one on right now, and I've set it to white noise, right? So that's going to give me your classic white noise sound. And what I've done actually is inside Operator, I'm using a filter. So I've chosen the bandpass filter here, and you can see the bandpass filter is right here. And you can see that the frequency here is what's automating, right? So over the course of these 8 bars, you'll hear this classic swooshy sound, right? Usually what we do too is we increase this, or we add a reverb with some nice decay on it to kind of make it softer and squishier. But this is the sound you get from that. So if I solo this track, so we don't really hear this very much. In fact, it wouldn't be a bad idea to just put some volume automation to kind of take this first bit out. We don't really need to hear that. Just the low end sound. The automation doesn't occur until later, right? So the automation, you can see, sweeps up here right at the very end and happens just right before the downbeat of the next bar. The last thing is using a reverse cymbal sound. So I've just taken the sound of a crash cymbal, right? Over here in my classic crash cymbals library, I just grabbed one of these crash cymbals. I can grab any one of them. I kind of listen to different ones. And then I drag this over here and then hit R to reverse it. and we get this sound, right? So you get that classic reverse cymbal sound. This one I've chosen is tighter than that. Listen to what it sounds like. Kind of comes to a dead stop. So that's kind of a cool effect. So essentially this is another white noise filter sweep, right? But what's happening, of course, is it's really small, very short. It's used just to get me to this downbeat of the next measure. And so all these things combined together create this whole texture that works together. Sounds like this again, just from this spot. So that's the basic concept, right? You're taking all of these little elements and putting them together to create this kind of long-term trajectory. Now, one thing that's really important with this is the preciseness of your automation. If your automation points don't kind of arrive at the same point, a lot of the time, it will not sound that convincing, or it won't sound as effective. So you can see actually almost all my automation points arrive right on bar 17 at the drop. But some of them arrive a little early, right? So the white noise filter sweep is arriving a tiny bit early. The crash cymbal, again, I have to line up that arrival right on that downbeat, right? So we get kind of arrival at the right moment. I mean, I always think it's like a bunch of dancers that are not quite in sync. If they're not quite in sync, what they're doing as a collective isn't going to really be impactful as if they were all in sync, right? So it's really important that your automation is kind of arriving at the same time. And that's a big factor in making these effects work, right? Now, again, you can do this without, it doesn't have to be electronic music. It doesn't even have to be tonal music. It doesn't have to have pitches at all. This could be something where you have noises that are increasing over time. They're getting faster. You're building in complexity. You're building in a white noise type of filter sweep. And you're creating this dramatic motion across the sound. So we covered all these 5 things, right? Increasing this peak frequency spectrum is the most used one. And this is, again, the one where we're using a filter sweep with automation. We created a white noise filter by using Operator, and I'm going to build another one of these right here now and show you how we're going to do it from scratch. The next one is we're building complexity and intensity by adding more rhythm in the texture to make it build up over time. Adding more layers. So that was a bunch of stuff that I added in the second half. I added the drums start to come in the second 8 bars, right? Then we get more repeated notes. The melody, the main arpeggiation that you hear, the melody starts to double because I'm using that version of it with lots of distortion. So there's many elements at once that are creating complexity and intensity at the same time. And then the last thing is using a reverse cymbal effect at the very right moment to make it sound like we arrive at these special moments in the music, right? So let's build one of these from scratch. I don't always have the same luck in building this kind of stuff, but let's just start over here and see how this goes. This is my... Okay, so I'm going to build a little track here, just exactly as we've been talking about, maybe just 8 bars to show you how something like this might happen. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I've chosen this easy sound. It has a lot of, it has a really nice sound to it. It has lots of, it's short and plucky, but there's a lot of sound afterwards. And with a little reverb on it, it has even nicer sound. So the first thing I'm going to need is an EQ8. Now I could also use the auto filter. So why don't we actually grab the auto filter, go to audio effects, and I'm just going to add auto filter here. And I'm going to instantly go down here and just know that I'm going to be doing a filter sweep. So let's give it some resonance. And I know I'm going to be wanting to automate this over time. Okay. So obviously I have to pick notes. And I'm going to do something really easy first and just choose a MIDI effect. I'm going to use the arpeggiator. And what this allows me to do is hold down the notes. And it will play them in sequentially. Let me change this tempo to make it better and faster. Hit the record button, turn the metronome on so it's on the whole time. Okay, so that was fine. It's not amazing. I'm going to go in here, just quantize this real quick. Let's make it a bar. And then it's going to line up, make sure let's just kick all these values to full volume too. Great, so I have my perfect pad here, my little sound here. I'm going to also do something, let's see if I can reduce the release time on these notes. Yes, the release time is right here. Let's make it shorter. So it's a little bit pluckier. Then I'm going to introduce the filter sweep, okay? So I'm going to turn automation on. All I have to do is click frequency, and now frequency is the marker here, right? So over these 8 bars, I can now increase this over time. So let's hear what this sounds like. That sounds fine. I'm also going to increase the resonance. So let's have the resonance build over these bars. So that by the end, it's peakier. It's going to sound interesting. So I have this sound. Now I'm going to double this, duplicate, because now I have the same thing on a different track, right? And what I'm going to do is grab this track and grab all these notes and shift up arrow to raise them up an octave. And now they sound like this, right? So, and what I'm going to do on this track is actually not have a filter on it. It's going to be completely open. And I'm going to change the instrument to something else. So maybe we'll choose like a guitar. And this will give it a really nice acoustic guitar. Let's hear what that sounds like. Fine. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of doing any filter sweeping at all I'm going to do is bring this in over 8 bars. So it's going to start at 0. And by the end here, we'll hear it at full volume. And that's going to do what we just talked about. Open up the filter sweep, open up this frequency spectrum of these these bars together. The next thing I'm going to do is make a white noise filter sweep. Okay, I'm going to do one that only lasts across from bar 9 to 16 here. So what I'm going to do is make a new MIDI track, Shift Command T for a MIDI track. Let's rename this white noise. And you could make an audio track and use an actual recording of white noise. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to grab operator. So I go over here, let's clear this filter out and that. Instruments, and I'm going to choose more filters on there. Just choose operator. So from the list, there it is. So operator has a white noise generator. I'm going to go down to the first oscillator here where it says sine and change this to white noise. Okay, now I could do a separate filter, but I'm going to use the filter right here in operator because there's a filter on this oscillator already. And what I need to do is set the filter to a bandpass, right? Because what we want to do is get that whoosh type of effect. And we only get that if we use a white noise or a bandpass filter. So the next thing I need a note, right? I need a note over these 8 bars. So I'm going to select all these bars, Shift Command M will make a MIDI region for those bars. And then I'm going to go here down to middle C and make a single note that's going to sustain the whole thing. So right now this is going to sound like this, right? what we're hearing is actually the filtered sound, 12,000 hertz of a bandpass filter. Without the filter, it sounds like this, right? It's a lot of noise. So with that filter on, it's going to be better. I'm also going to add a reverb. So let's add the hybrid reverb. So just to soften this sound. Now, what I need to do is I'm going to turn up the res some, and I'm going to filter sweep this. So I click on filter frequency, and then that becomes, of course, the operator automation line. And I'm going to go out here and put a node at the end and at the beginning and just do this, okay? Now, what you might find more useful in these if it's a parabolic or an exponential curve. So if I hold down Option, I can turn this into a curve and get a good effect with that. Now, I probably don't want to hear really low frequencies in this. Like if we solo this, right? You're hearing noise down there. So I could do, there's lots of stuff I could do. I could just add some flat out volume automation to get rid of that. Let's just do that. I'm going to just say, I don't want to hear the beginning of this. We can slowly ramp up over time. So let's hear what this sounds like now. And there it is, right? So we have that effect over those bars. The next thing I'm going to do is add my crash cymbal, okay? So I'm going to make an audio track, Command T to make an audio track. I'll rename this Reverse Crash. And I'm just going to go to my library over here, these drum kit samples, go to cymbals, crashes. I'll just use modern. Can pick any of these. That's a nice one, maybe. And then I hit the key R to reverse it, right? So now we're going to get this effect, right? And that's going to happen right on the downbeat of measure 17 because that's where we're going. That's the drop, the location that this is ending. So let's hear this whole thing now just by itself. Oops, solo's on. Cool. So we do have most of the things we want here. I'm going to actually grab these notes and push them out a little bit so there's not that little gap in there. We mostly have what we want here, but you know, we need those drums, the repeated drums to come in, which could be really useful. So I'm going to go to my hi-hats track here, right? And again, just to make this quick, I'm going to grab a closed hi-hat. Let's just grab a single sample. There it is. We'll grab that one. And over the course of these 8 bars, I'm also going to bring in those hi-hats. Actually, and I don't even think I'm going to filter these. I'm just going to do this. Let's hear what this sounds like. Now I could filter these if I want, but I'm just going to leave them like that. It's just going to add another layer of sound, right? And let's do the same thing with a snare. So I'm going to duplicate this track, rename this snare. And then on this track, I can add a snare drum. So, and you know, this is where you might want something really that you're going to repeat a lot, right? So I'm going to go to these rims. That's a good one. Just drop this onto the first thing. And let me just copy this here. So obviously that's really kind of an obnoxious sound. We don't want that the whole time. Maybe it's only going to be the first half. You know, we'll see. I'm going to filter it too, though. So let's grab another EQ. I'll use EQ8 this time. Make a bandpass or a low-pass filter. And then grab the filter automation and make this come in over time. So that is essentially it, right? Now I can add more stuff. I could add a kick drum if I wanted to. I could add another layer, another synth or something to make this get more intense over time. But I have the basic building blocks to make this go, right? Notice that when everything that I've done here, I'm working in these 4-bar and 8-bar phrases, right? So maybe, another really quick thing we could do is add the kick drum. Maybe we do 4 on the floor kick drums here that are going to come in on every downbeat, every beat, right, of the measure. So go back to my kit. Kicks, I don't really care which, something punchy. Maybe that one. Right? And then on bar 13, this is going to come in like this. And I'm just going to repeat this 4 times. So now we hear this. So it's just another layer, but you get the general sense of what is happening here, right? And again, these 5 basic principles. We've introduced filter sweeping, right? We are increasing the intensity of rhythm by adding new layers. We are and adding more music and more rhythm. We are adding the white noise filter sweep, right? We are adding the reverse cymbal crash at the very end to bring us to the drop, right? And those are the 5 elements that we're looking for to create this type of motion.